when you have a Mozart, and then you start trying to come up with newfangled ways to generate music, you're probably not going to do as well as Mozart did. And we had a group of Mozarts that gave us our Constitution and our Declaration.
John, how's the Constitution doing these days?
Dead man walking. It's like, look, the Constitution is under attack from so many areas. People ask me why I'm so busy these days. I say we only get involved in cases where the Constitution is being ignored. It's become a full-time job. Look, there are a couple of propositions. The very nature and purpose of government has changed. We no longer have consensus about that. And that means we no longer have a consensus that government ought to be limited. Mm-hmm. Some people think that government only does good, and therefore we need more of it. And in fact, if we can have it all-encompassing to take care of us from cradle to grave, that would be so much more good that would be utopia on earth, right? And they forget that in our human nature, you give people power, they tend to abuse it for their own purposes rather than the common good. And that's why we have a limited government. And that basic fight, whether we're going to continue to have a limited government or we're going to have an omnipotent government, is what we're in now. And an omnipotent government can't exist with a constitution that sets out a limited government structure.
Mm-hmm. Well, by unlimited government, you know, semantics is all, or maybe not all, but almost all. The left would say, we mean the living Constitution, not the dead one, the 18th century one that you're trying to revive. But that's the dead man, maybe not walking. What do we think of the living Constitution?
Well, I don't know what it is. They say that the Constitution evolves to keep up with current times. I ask law professors that come up with these theories about how it's evolved, and I say, well, tell me what the new rule is, because it seems ever evolving. And if it evolves in the direction they like, they think it's good. If it starts evolving in the direction they don't like, or back my direction,
yes,
they think that's bad, and they say, well, you can't do that.
That's not evolution.
And that's right. Jefferson had a great line here. He recognizes that a current legislature can never bind a future legislature. Mm-hmm. But when they passed the Jefferson's Statute on Religious Freedom, he says the truths we are identifying here are immutable. And so any deviation from them would not be progress.
Right.
And if the founders actually achieved some immutable truths that they built into the Constitution, the notion that limited government is the best protective of rights, what have you, that when we deviate from it, it's not progress, but it infringes the rights that the constitutional structure was designed to protect.
Right. This is like Coolidge's formulation in his famous speech on the Declaration. Right? There's no progress beyond limited government, constitutional government, the equality of man. You can only go backwards, not forwards from certain truths.
When you have a Mozart, and then you start trying to come up with newfangled ways to generate music, you're probably not going to do as well as Mozart did. And we had a group of Mozarts that gave us our Constitution and our Declaration. They really were giants, intellectual giants. There were a unique set of circumstances. They had the philosophical foundations from their studies, and they had the practical foundations from their experiments in self-government in the states leading up to the Revolution. That was kind of a unique alignment of the stars that gave us a great set of governing principles.
They had a living education. In tyranny, which tends to concentrate the mind.
That's right.
But would a conscientious liberal would not admit to your distinction, I think, because he would say, look, we're about rights too. We're about protecting rights. We're about protecting individual rights. It's just that rights, like society, are evolving things. And so you want to protect a basket of old rights, and we want to protect the most necessary new rights. Are they right in that characterization?
No, but that means, since I've criticized Justice Scalia earlier, let me praise him. He said, our newfangled notion of rights tends to expand rights for some at the expense of others. And so I'll give you an example. Somebody told me the other day, he says, well, why shouldn't people have a right to health care? And I said, well, of course they should have a right to health care, but what you're seeking is the right to have somebody else pay for their health care, right? And that, of course, deprives somebody else of their natural right to the property, the fruits of their own labor, to provide something for somebody else. That's not rights, that's actually slavery when I can force somebody else to work for me. And the same could be true of all of the other newfangled rights, the right to housing, the right, all of these things that come out of Roosevelt's New Deal, right? These are the new rights. What we call positive rights actually deprive somebody else of their natural rights, by definition.
The second Bill of Rights.
The second Bill of Rights deprives people of their first Bill of Rights. And until we talk about it and recognize it in those terms, conservatism will not have a full answer to the living Constitution.
But wouldn't you say, I mean, is there a problem here? Because as you were arguing earlier, you have a duty to pay taxes to provide for courthouses and police forces and all kinds of things, which you may not agree with personally, and you may therefore regard such exactions as violations of your property rights. How would one distinguish that case from not paying taxes or paying taxes to provide a right to health care to other people as a kind of taking of your property against your will?
The one seeks to tax everybody to provide for the things, the public goods, for the common good. The other seeks to tax some to provide for the private welfare of others. And I think our Constitution's text actually addresses this. The power to tax and spend in our Constitution is to provide for the common defense and the general welfare. What Roosevelt and the New Deal did is turn that phrase general welfare, which meant national welfare. You could not tax one region of the country to pay for projects in another. If I wanted to expand the road in Santa Ana, California, then the people of Santa Ana should tax themselves to pay for their road, not be able to tax the folks in Rhode Island to pay for their road. General welfare. Roosevelt turned that almost in a Linskyite turn of phrase, if you will, a little anachronistic, right? Welfare meant the provision of goods to individuals, not the general welfare, and therefore it was okay to take money from you to give to somebody else. Madison says that that's the very definition of tyranny, to take property from one to another. So we've turned the protections in the Constitution upside down in order to have this new notion of rights, positive rights that have come out.
So it's unconstitutional to take money from Peter and give it to Paul, but in providing health care, in providing a right to unemployment benefits, you couldn't defend those on the grounds that they have systemic effects, that they're good for society at large, they serve the common good, even if they're not a classic public good?
Well, let's try to look at it the way the founders would have. Even if that were true, that would be true at the local and state governments, not at the national government. Because the danger of doing it at the national government is to create such an infrastructure on a nationwide scale requires such an exercise of power by the central government that the risk is that it'll become tyrannical in a whole number of other areas. And I think we're seeing that play out. That the more government controls the things of daily life, which were supposed to occur regulated at the state or local level, the more power it has and the more it can abuse that power.
Now, which branch of government is currently most dangerous to the Constitution, would you say?
One of the great erroneous predictions of our founding generation was that the judiciary was the least dangerous branch, and it has become the most dangerous, both because it makes up rights and then imposes them against the democratic process, but also because it has abdicated its role to serve as a check on the valid exercises of legislative power. And by abdicating that role, it has allowed the legislature to do whatever it wants. And legislatures are going to try and grab as much power as they can. The judiciary abdicating that role makes it most dangerous because it lets the legislature get away with it.
So it was Hamilton in the Federalist Papers who pronounced that the judiciary